Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mary Tupan. I'm the director of the Center of Diversity Policy, and I want to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me on the topic of the integration of migrant children in the European society. I will focus on the practical part of, what is necessary to create agency among children, to support them and acknowledge them in who they are and what they can achieve in education. And I will do that from the work that I do at ECHO and we've been doing. I mean, we are a nonprofit organization existing for 26 years, working on policy and practice in the field of education, diversity and inclusion in education. And but especially what our focus is on what is necessary to transform policy to practice. So I would like to begin with supporting the work of Child Up and acknowledge the important work that they have been doing with this project. I mean, focusing on agency of migrant children is, I think, in a time that we are living in Europe with a growing diversity of many children from different walks of life in society, but also a growing share of migrant children in society that, participate in schools and society. And, and there's often, I think that this is something that is part of the reality of a multicultural society, is that we welcome everybody in our countries, but how it evolves in society, how it evolves in education is a different trajectory. So I think what Child Up has been doing is how can schools support children in their growth process within education, and how can children rely on their social and cultural capital that they have been acquiring in their own communities, within their home surroundings, and to what extent is that acknowledged by educators in education? So, that's basically the first question. What is needed to enhance agency of migrant children? How can we acknowledge and accept their cultural capital? And that is something, I mean, there is not one cultural capital. And I think that that's important. With a growing diversity in society, in education, we also have to be aware that there are different ways, forms of cultural capital that are all relevant to the context of the world where children come from. And how can that be supportive in an inclusive learning environment? And I think that that's the interesting thing of the Child Up project, that it focuses on, enhancing and supporting the agency of children in general, but also migrant children especially, and also focusing on, an innovative way of how can that be transformative and interesting also for the school and the learning class, the learning environment, basically. There are persisting challenges when we look at the multicultural society in general, but also what it means to education and the classroom. Because often the question is, who has to change? And if you look at a lot of the research and also all practices that have been developed in the past years, because Europe is not starting from scratch. This is something that has been evolving and has been part of our reality for quite some years, but we're still struggling with how to capture what is really effective and what has impact. And I think a basic question always has been, who has to change? And if you look at many of the cases and the good practices or promising practices, the focus has always been on the children or the incoming persons in society that have to change, while many countries and many societies who have a large, whose society have been becoming so ethnically diverse, it is more a systematic question, and so not just the persons who are coming in have to change. In fact, systems have to change. And that's a big question. That's not a question that we solve from today or tomorrow, but it's a process. And in many ways, I mean, there are cities where the former majority is also a minority. And that's an interesting shift in talking about who is the minority and who's the majority. So, taking that into account, but also another question, another challenge is what is necessary to change mindsets and awareness of teachers in having high expectations of children in their journey to a new society. And this is a very persisting challenge, because although teachers have the best intentions in doing their work, welcoming children who are from a different social background, who bring different religions, who bring different cultural elements into their classroom, also poses challenges. And what we see is that there are different expectations from different children who come into the classroom. And I think in making sure that you acknowledge agency and support children in their aspiration development, it is important to have high expectations from all students and from all children. A big question, as I said, is what is necessary to change systems. And, that's in fact a collaborative challenge for governmental, from the national government, for the local government, on a school level, on a school board level, but at the end also on a very micro level, the interaction between students and teachers. So making sure that systems are able to cater for a more diverse children population with different backgrounds, ethnically, religiously, socially, is something that is is a process, but it is all, and I think that that's the part that I want to stress. It is very contextualized. So what works in one system is not necessarily, would not necessarily work in another system, because changing systems is also very much relevant to the national systems or the regional systems in Europe. So, but it is important to have the conversation. What are conditions and barriers within systems? Are systems accessible? And sometimes systems are accessible because the financial part is taken care of, but that is not immediately. That doesn't make the system accessible, because it's also everything that children have to counter in terms of seeing themselves progressing in education, feeling acknowledged for who they are and what they bring into education. But also political context is important, the culture and climate within the classroom. So what I wanted to do is to take you with me in a few of the elements that we see in our work, in the work of ECHO, what we see as important elements that are a repetition in challenges and also solutions. I mean, what is important, and this has been an important part of the work of Child Up, is including voices of the target groups whose life we want to improve. And, you know, agency is a beautiful word for it, but, you know, giving voice to the voiceless, in fact, in society is an important part. That's something also that is an important part in the work of ECHO. Identifying networks of diverse communities and validating children's and their communities' culture. And I think this is an important one. I mean, you know, and this is not new. I mean, this is what we know of. You know, there's always a dominance and there's always a dominant culture, and in the whole development of creating or embracing a multicultural or a more diverse community, it also goes hand in hand with validating other cultures, other traditions that people bring, and not necessarily only linked to you know, the multicultural community, but also having different socioeconomic groups within society with different local cultures is also something that we have to be aware of. Having a shared vocabulary is very much important. What do we mean with migrant students, with children? What do we mean with youth who come with a background of you know, who come as a refugee into different countries? And you know, also given the current situation where we are in, you know, there are refugees from different parts of the world, you know, different continents, and there is a big group who just arrived in different European countries from Ukraine. And I think that that's also important to be aware of, that we have a shared vocabulary and maybe a shared history, European history, and with refugees who come from closer to our homes, and but our shared vocabulary is different with refugees from other parts of the world, and that's also something that we have to be aware of. In this context, it's also important to be aware of a color blind, that we have to shift from a color blind to a color brave approach. And this is a big part of the work of ECHO. What we often hear is, you know, and I want to make sure that you understand what I mean with color blind and color brave. Color blind, or color in this context, is not literally color. It is also about color. So it's also about multiculturalism, but it's also related to other dimensions of diversity. So socioeconomic background, gender, different gender identities, ableism. So it is in fact focusing on marginalization. And sometimes what we often hear is that people say, I don't see color, everybody is the same to me. And that is, although that's a very, you know, a beautiful way of saying that you want to reach out to the other, it often is important for the person who is different to be acknowledged for their difference. And that's why having, making sure that you look at each other from a color brave approach is important. In my case, for instance, I am always happy to be acknowledged for who I am as, a woman of color. So getting comfortable with the uncomfortable is something that is an important part of the trainings that we do, is moving to being part of a diverse society is like I also mentioned before, is goes with a lot of challenges. And I think that and this is also a very contextualized situation, but talking about exclusion is something that we don't often like to do. While, it should be an important part in the conversation about inclusion, because the conversation always starts with, societies or education is diverse. How can we create an inclusive environment, which is beautiful, but that's often the happy talk. And, the happy talk can only grow into an impactful conversation if we are also aware of the fact that there are also exclusionary practices, and not necessarily between individuals, but also if we talk about institutional sexism, institutional racism, institutional ableism, or institutional heterosexism. Those are parts that are integrated in the systems, and are often ideologies about one group being inferior to a superior other group. And I think that that's part of, and of course, and that's those are all the isms, but discrimination is also part of the reality of all the countries. So, and I think the last part is challenging the dominant norm on different levels, and that goes hand in hand with everything that we do. And that's why giving agency to children at a very young age is important, because they're often not part of the norm, but by raising their voice, by showing to others who they are, what they bring to the table, what they bring from their own culture and their own personal development, will change the social norm and the conversation about who is the social norm and how can we change the social norm. So this is to show you that talking about agency in primary education is the start of a long trajectory that children often have to go through to even feel a sense of belonging in society, to feel successful, to feel social safety. And this is also very much in relation to what we have been seeing also in social harassment, or in sexual harassment, and related to a lot of Me Too cases, in different countries, and in the Netherlands especially, we have been dealing with this in the past few months. But so, being aware of the fact that what we invest in primary education and in personal developments of children will always have a benefit in their transition to secondary education, to higher education, and even if they want to continue to master from a bachelor to a master and to a PhD. I don't say that that's the pathway that children have to progress, because there are so many different trajectories in education. But I think the most important is that they are making the choice for themselves that fits who they are and what fits their plans. So looking at agency and looking at pathways into education, I think we have to be aware that and this is something that we often share in conversations, that looking and improving education is not just about education. And especially for children who are part of marginalized communities. I mean, it is, school is definitely important for them. Sometimes school is a safe haven for them in relation to, you know, the home environment. Sometimes school is a scary environment for them, and their home environment is a very safe and a part that they know very well. But you know, there's they have their communities, there are community organizations who are active, there are governments. Oh, I see this, it's not written well. There are companies who are doing the work, there are universities. So, you know, I mean, in pathways to education, I think that we have to be aware that there are so many stakeholders who are working in this field as well. And I think in this part, I also want to acknowledge the fact that besides formal education, there are so many informal educational providers who do excellent work and in fact are the ones who are closer to the communities of many migrant children, and who do a lot of the unseen work with them to make sure that they feel acknowledged. And so I think that that's something that we can probably, from a policy point of view, can probably acknowledge more. And how can formal and informal education, you know, be better connected. And I don't say that all informal education providers are, you know, are a good fit for formal education, but definitely there are definitely important informal education providers who do wonderful work in society. And this is also a part of the, and this is more just for you if you're interested. One of the projects that we have been part of is the Multinclude project. And the Multinclude project, we analyzed 74 cases of inclusive education. And these 74 cases are cases from pre-primary to higher education. I think 70% of the cases are from Europe and from different parts of Europe, and the other parts are from outside of Europe. And so ECHO did the analysis, and we also wrote a policy brief, and these are the links to the analysis. And I think what was interesting to see is what I just shared about the role of informal education providers, is that they have a more important role in making sure that students are successful. And also, you know, talking about inclusive learning environments, learning happens everywhere. It happens in school, but definitely also outside of school. And I think being aware of that is also important. I think the next slide is, yes. So I'm not going to share all the conclusions from the report we did, given the time. I just want to share 4 approaches that we have been that came out of this analysis. And, you know, I mean, our assignment with this analysis was to look at strategies for inclusive education. And what we found is that there's not one strategy. There are many strategies. And because working on inclusive learning environments is a contextualized is very contextualized. So what we did see is that there are 4 approaches that we see are important in creating inclusion strategies and to make sure that education becomes more inclusive. The first one is the color brave approach. I already mentioned it in the beginning of my presentation. The second one is a holistic approach. That's also what I just mentioned, that, you know, investing in education is not just about education. It's about healthcare. It's about, you know, work the work situation and the financial situation of children and their parents. It's about religion. It's also about your health and mental being, well-being of children and families. So, you know, being aware of that is important. An intersectional approach. I think that this is when we look at the multicultural society, and if we certainly look at generations of children who have a migration background but have been living in European countries now for a few generations, they are not just somebody with a migration background. They are also, you know, there are different identities, elements of their identities that are overlapping, that are combining them, that are making them who they are, what is called an intersectional approach. And I think an intersectional approach is that we are aware that there are different intersections in identities among children, but also for ourselves, and that sometimes, and being aware of the overlapping identities is important, that we to be aware of that, the intersecting and overlapping identities are not leading to a double or a triple form of exclusion, or a double or triple form of privilege. And I think that that's something that is important. And the other approach is a pathway approach, that we are aware of, that the starting point in education is in pre-primary and primary, but after that there are many other parts of the pathway to work and to higher education. And that every transition from one sector to another can also be a part where students can drop out. So those are the four approaches that I wanted to share with you from the Multinclude project. And this is my last slide. This is just an example of what we see among agency of migrant youth. These are pictures of students who have been nominated for the ECHO Award. We started in 2001 with the ECHO Award, so it's being in place now for for more than 20 years. And these are all young people who are nominated by their institution because they are not only academically high achievers, but they have always been active in society during their studies and will continue to do that even if they are working. And these are young people who came as a refugee, who have a migration background, a first generation, second generation, third generation, and have been you know, have had the opportunity to show their agency, and just this picture is to show you what happens when they progress in society, when they progress in education, which is not always a trajectory without barriers, I have to say. I mean, they have dealt with a lot of the barriers, but they've always kept in mind how important their role is and how important their role can be in showing agency and making, you know, and making sure that generations after them can even, you know, go through the education system with less barriers, hopefully. And so, you know, and I just want to show you what empowerment of agency and the hybridity and identity and integration on the long term can do. And this is a picture of the finalists from 2021 and the 4 winners with the new Minister of Education in the Netherlands. So I think this is my last slide, and I wanted to thank you all for joining me conversation, and I'm looking forward to the questions you have. Thank you. Chiara, you're muted.
Yes. Thank you, Mary. I want to really, your presentation, it's something that gives hope, especially in this particular period of our history, I would say. I mean, not only European one, but worldwide, I would say. And I would like to highlight one concept and really explain again to us this really, that I found it's a key concept about colorblind and color-brave approach. This is really, for me, I mean, I'm a pedagogist and I work with children, and this is really a switch in having, in dealing with children, in creating with them a relationship. And so could you explain again briefly the difference of between colorblind and color-brave?
Yes. A colorblind approach is often seen as something that is often seen as a positive thing, because, you know, we don't want to see color. And I think that that's a good start of acknowledging that you want to treat the other as equal. And but I think what is important in that is that we are not all the same, and that we have to embrace difference. And difference means being from a different socioeconomic group. Difference means being from a different ethnic or racial group. Difference means having a different start in the society where you're living now, or you know, have parts of your identity are hidden. And so, you know, we often relate to each other based on what we see. And but there are so many hidden parts of our identities that we don't see, and that's why it is important to be color brave and to have that conversation with each other about who you are. And it doesn't have to be, you know, a very heavy conversation, but just asking each other, you know, hi, who are you? And, you know, tell me a little more about who you are. You know, tell me a little bit more about your identity. And I think a conversation with children on being color brave is in fact quite easy, because children are open books. They want to share who they are. And it is about acknowledging you for who you are, also acknowledging you for all the hidden parts of your identity, and using that in making education more equitable instead of equal. Because what we always see is that, you know, equality and equity are two different, you know, being colorblind is having a focus on equality, and being color brave is having a focus on equity. And I think that that's something that's I think an important part in explaining it, because those concepts are well-known concepts in our work. So that's an important an important part. And I think acknowledging being color brave is also literally talking about color. I mean, I think if you look at all the different dimensions of diversity, talking about ethnicity, color, culture is always a bit tense. because, you know, what we often hear is that people say, you know, I'm afraid to stigmatize, I'm afraid to be discriminating in the things that I say. But the thing is, I mean, having a conversation about who you are, about your different, you know, your racial background, your ethnic community, is something that often people who are part of these communities would love to share, and would love to share about who they are, and especially children, because I mean, you know, for instance, in April, the Ramadan starts. So many children in, for instance, the Netherlands are maybe not in primary education, but students, you know, many people from the community starts the Ramadan, and that's something that is, I think, a good example of how a color brave approach can open up conversations about, you know, asking colleagues of students to share a little bit about, you know, how is their what is their a typical day during the Ramadan. And so it is also about showing interest, but especially acknowledging you for who you are with all the different identities.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I mean, I was thinking that asking to someone who you are, it's not an easy question to reply, even for the one who has been asked, because, I mean, sometimes it's also useful for who needs to reply, because it's just a moment to reflect who we are, who I am. Because sometimes also for us as individuals, as persons, it's not easy to explain who I am. I mean,
Exactly.
as you say, exactly. So, and probably as adults, probably for children, this comes easier than us. And probably it's a moment also to learn from them, or to come back on our children aspect, to
Yes,
to recontact ourselves.
exactly. And I think one dimension that I also want to mention in a colorblind and a color brave approach is the element of power structures. And, you know, I mean, talking about being color brave is also acknowledging that there are differences in power structures, and differences in, you know, some people being part of a more of a group that is being seen as inferior to another group. But, you know, so, but that's another conversation for another time.
Exactly.
But that's definitely also an element that is relevant to those two concepts.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I would stay to talk with you longer, because it's really interesting, and I can see also the passion through which you work with these children, actually, not with this, with children and with migrants, and for inclusion, that it's really not an easy issue to tackle every time. I mean, because inclusion implies different, as you say, aspect, and also of ourselves, that it's not easy to deal with. Okay, thank you, Mary, and thank you also for your availability on recording this presentation. I hope
Thank
we
you
will
also
see.
so much, Chiara, for the invitation.
Okay, thank you. Now I stop recording.